Ever notice how, like, after a truly bad night of sleep,
Hmm.
you're just, well, not your most generous self the next day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like maybe you're less likely to help a coworker out,
Mm.
or maybe slower to offer a friend a ride home.
Right.
Well, get this. It turns out there's this super interesting connection between how much sleep we get
Hmm.
and, get this, how willing we are to help others.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It really challenges how we think about, altruism in general.
Yeah.
We often think about it as like a personality trait, right?
Right.
But what if something as simple as sleep could really impact our drive to sort of do good?
It's wild. To unpack this whole sleep altruism connection,
Yeah.
we're going to do a deep dive into some fascinating research you shared.
Yeah.
We've got 3 studies to look at.
Okay.
One that looks at how sleep loss affects us personally,
Mm-hmm.
another that tracks like real-world sleep patterns,
Mm.
and then a last one that's, well, let's just call it a nation-sized experiment.
That's a great way to put it. It's a really amazing collection of data that really gives us a really comprehensive view of this kind of unexpected connection.
So let's start with that first one,
Okay.
the one about individual sleep loss.
Okay.
Basically, they took a group of healthy adults, 24 of them, and they, well, this is going to sound really familiar to anyone who's ever pulled an all-nighter.
Oh, yeah.
They deprived half of them of sleep for a whole night.
I know that feeling, unfortunately.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
But here's the really interesting part.
Okay.
The next morning, they tested everyone's willingness to help others. And guess what?
What?
The sleep-deprived group, they showed a significant drop in their desire to lend a hand.
It's pretty incredible, actually. 78% of the sleep-deprived participants showed this decline. And here's the crucial part.
Okay.
It wasn't because they were in a bad mood or they were feeling lazy or anything like that. The study really carefully accounted for things like mood changes, effort levels, even just those individual differences in empathy that we all have as people.
So it's almost like even if they wanted to help, something was stopping them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
And this is where I think it gets really interesting. Deep within our brains, we have this network of regions called the social cognition network.
Hmm.
And this network is basically the control center for how we understand and respond to other people.
Okay, so time for a little brain science. Break it down for us.
So, put simply, the social cognition network, it helps us decode other people's needs, their perspective, their emotions, all of those things that make us social creatures.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that sleep deprivation seems to directly disrupt this system. Like, the study showed that lack of sleep specifically disrupts the activity in this network, which might explain why the sleep-deprived folks were less inclined to help.
So we're like less wired for connection when we don't get enough sleep.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Wild.
But that first study we talked about, they used, like, extreme sleep deprivation.
Well, right.
Like a whole night with no sleep.
Yeah.
So what about those of us who just have a slightly off night? You only get like 6 hours instead of your usual 8.
Oh, please tell me that doesn't matter because I am the queen of the just one more episode.
Oh, I'm sure you're not alone.
Right.
And that's actually exactly what this second study looked at. It took this whole idea out of the lab and into the real world. So instead of forcing sleep deprivation, they tracked 136 people's natural sleep patterns over 4 days and their, day-to-day helping behaviors.
Okay, so what did they find? Was it as simple as less sleep, less helping?
It was actually even more nuanced than that.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, while getting fewer hours of sleep, yeah, it did correlate with less helpfulness the next day. What really surprised me was the impact of sleep quality.
You mentioned that earlier, so it's not just about hitting a certain number, it's like how well you're actually sleeping.
Exactly. Even if you're technically in bed for a good chunk of time, if you're tossing and turning all night, your brain isn't getting that truly restorative sleep that it needs. And the study actually found that poor sleep quality, even when someone got, a decent number of hours, was still linked to a lower willingness to help others the next day.
It's almost like those nights where, like, you wake up and you're like, I don't even feel rested.
Yeah.
Like your body had the time, it just didn't, like, hit the spot.
Yeah, exactly. And what's even more interesting is that this link between sleep and helpfulness, it held up even when they factored in whether or not someone had helped someone the previous day. So, there's this whole idea that we only have so much helpfulness to give, that we get depleted. But this study kind of suggests that sleep plays a more significant role than we might realize.
Oh, wow. Okay, now my mind is really blown.
Yeah.
So it's not just like an energy thing.
Right.
It's like something deeper going on, like in our brains.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned a third study, though,
Yeah.
one that's on like a national scale.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to design a study like that?
So this is where things get really clever. They use daylight saving time, that spring forward, fall back thing, as like a naturally occurring sleep experiment.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So think about it. When we spring forward, we all lose an hour of sleep.
Right.
It's like a nationwide sleep deprivation event.
Don't remind me.
Yeah.
I think we all feel that Monday slump.
Exactly. So these researchers, they analyzed a massive amount of data. Over 3 million charitable donations made in the U.S. between 2001 and 2016. And they specifically honed in on the weeks before, during, and after the DST transition.
So they were looking to see if people were, like, less generous after losing that hour.
Exactly. And the findings, pretty striking. Donations consistently dropped during the week of daylight saving time compared to the weeks before and after. And this pattern, this was consistent across years.
Wow.
And to top it off, when we fall back and gain an hour, donations didn't increase, kind of suggesting it really was that sleep loss, not just something about that time of year, you know.
Wow. That's incredible. A whole country, a little sleep deprived, and suddenly they're less charitable. I was thinking this whole sleep altruism thing was just about me maybe being a little snippy with my husband after a bad night. But this suggests it's something much, much bigger.
It really highlights how even subtle changes in our sleep can have these ripple effects on a much larger societal scale. And it makes you wonder about, those broader implications.
It really makes you think about like those days when you're just running on fumes and just feeling kind of, I don't know, short-tempered.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe it's not just me being selfish. Maybe it's like my sleep-deprived brain hijacking my better instincts.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so fascinating about this research. It really challenges us to sort of look beyond those like simple assumptions we make about behavior and really consider, the biological underpinnings. And, we've talked a lot about like individual behavior and those impacts. Mm. But these findings have some like really thought-provoking implications for, society as a whole, right?
Absolutely. Like we talk about things like, empathy is declining and people just aren't as kind as they used to be. But what if, like, a part of that is as simple as people not getting enough sleep?
Right. It's a really compelling idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, it could even change how we approach some of these, like, societal issues, right? Imagine if instead of just, like, urging people to be more altruistic, we also encourage them to, like, prioritize sleep.
Right. It's a much more, like, concrete, actionable message. Want to make the world a better place? Start by getting a good night's rest.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to consider. And, all of this really makes me think about, the role of mood in all of this. We haven't touched on that as much, but, these studies did account for, like, general mood. And even when they did that, the sleep-deprived folks were still less helpful overall.
So even when they, like, controlled for just being grumpy, the sleep deprivation still had an impact.
Exactly. And I think it makes sense, right? Like, when we're well-rested, we tend to be more positive, we're more resilient to stress, and I think that just naturally makes us more open to helping others.
Yeah.
It's not always a conscious choice. It's just, easier to be kind when you're not running on empty, so to speak.
Totally, totally. Wow. So not only might we be, like, less equipped to help others when we're sleep deprived, but we also might just be in a worse mood to do it.
Yeah.
It's like a double whammy.
Exactly. It's this fascinating interplay of like biological, psychological, and even societal factors all kind of coming together.
This deep dive has been amazing.
It has.
We started with this like seemingly out there connection between sleep and altruism, and now like I'm seeing those implications everywhere.
Yeah.
It's really incredible, and it really makes you wonder, if we all like prioritize sleep a little more, would we actually see a ripple effect of kindness out in the world?
Now, wouldn't that be something? It's a question worth like really pondering.
It really is. And, on that note, I think we're going to leave our listeners with that thought. What if the key to unlocking greater kindness, both in ourselves and in society, is really as simple as getting a good night's rest?
That's the question.
It is the question. Something to, sleep on, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And until next time, sleep well.